Welcome to the ListenUp Podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the ListenUp Podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare, and today will not disappoint. This episode is brought to you by ListenUp Hearing Centers. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can connect better with their friends and family and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss in patients is I lost my brother Robbie twice. First to his hearing loss and later when he passed away from his tumor. I am an ear, nose, and throat who only takes care of the E or the ears. I performed over 10,000 ear surgeries in my career and taken care of many more with hearing loss. I'm the founder of ListenUp Hearing Center, and I also have a book by the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to listenuphearing.com. Today, I have a great guest. It's Dr. Heather Malyuk. She's the founder of Soundcheck Audiology, a mobile concierge wellness practice. She's a musician and an audiologist who hails from Northeast Ohio, and she's known internationally as an expert clinician and public speaker in the field of hearing wellness. She grew up in the music industry and since the age of 2 has been a singer, playing piano, the violin, and the fiddle, and the guitar. In her early teen years, she began teaching music, touring, and recording. She received an undergraduate degree in music history and literature from the University of Akron, and then pursued a doctorate in audiology and received that from Kent State University. She pursues her passion for both music and audiology, propelling her to become one of the world's leading experts in hearing wellness for those who love sound. She's a great expert. We're going to talk, our great guest. We're going to talk about great stuff today, including musicians, hearing loss, and concierge care. Heather, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark.
This is great. So tell me, obviously the intro kind of spelled it out, but, connect the concept of hearing, sound, music, audiology, how it all came together for you, because it's a really wonderful part of the field, and to have somebody who's passionate on both sides is excellent.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to share. So as it was mentioned previously, I grew up in a musical family. I've been playing and performing my whole life, and I do have a degree in music history. I was in a master's program to get a master's in ethnomusicology and was a grad school dropout because in the first week I found out about audiology. And I had never really heard that term before. I did have a grandma who wore hearing aids, but, never really thought about it. And I went and looked into the subject and was blown away and just fell in love immediately because my main instrument really, I realized, was my ears. And no one had ever talked to me about them through all of my musical training, being in youth orchestras, music school, touring, going to jams. No one ever mentioned hearing. So from the get-go, when I applied to the Northeast Ohio Audiology Consortium through Kent State, and they accepted me, I knew that hearing conservation and working with musicians was going to be my goal. So I decided to start specializing right away. I read every paper I could get my hands on. If I had a project to do, I focused on musicians. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Michael Santucci, owner of Sensophonics, and spending my 4th year externship with him and subsequently directing his clinic for a number of years before opening Soundcheck at the end of 2017.
So I assume the name is a reference to when people do a sound check before
That's
concert.
Right. That's right. And often pre-COVID, most of my work was during or right after or right before sound check with bands. So I would go, I would go and am starting to go again backstage to work with the bands in their own environment. So
that, in terms of that, this is talking about receivers, those types of things in terms of how do musicians, one of the struggles, you could correct me if I'm wrong, is the concept of preservation of your hearing can alter the musician's perception of the sound that they are producing. So some of them avoid it or have a bad feeling about it or haven't used it, et cetera, because they're more interested in having the fidelity of the right music than worrying about their hearing. Is that a reasonable statement?
I think that's partially accurate. I think a lot of it is under education.
Sure.
Also, some of them live pretty booked up, crazy lifestyles, and they can't necessarily get into their local friendly audiologist. And when they do, they're not really met with the type of information that they need.
For their particular niche, right?
For their particular niche, yeah. So it just, I think it's a combination of various things. But for some, if not many, yes, they have this perception that hearing care is going to alter their career in some way. Although I say that, but the younger generations, it's starting to be the opposite, where they're realizing that they need it.
It's funny you say that. So I have a college-age son. He performs in an a cappella group. And he actually called me up and said, I need earplugs. I was like, what do you need earplugs for? So he has musician earplugs. And the reason was, he's like, my Apple Watch told me that the exposure to sound is excessive during their a cappella practice, right? Like, you really wouldn't think that that would necessarily be an exposure, but even technology is informed. So he probably, I'm sure if I had been, I was not in a cappella, but if I had been in college, I wouldn't have worried about it at all.
The education is totally different now. Just like that, there are so many resources at our fingertips and things reminding us. And maybe that was accurate or maybe not for his exposure, but it got him to think about it.
Correct.
And hopefully when someone gets a pair of earplugs or this and that, they start getting annual hearing evaluations, which we know is also a huge part of hearing conservation. So I do see things starting to turn around a little bit, which is
I agree. I mean, as a parent and somebody in the hearing space, the last thing I was going to do was discourage him rather than say, well, it's probably not that loud. I mean, that would be probably the worst thing to do, because I want him to protect his ears. And
he'll need them in so many environments. My goodness, what a wonderful tool to have, for going to concerts, anything really.
Sure.
So I feel like everyone should have a good pair of earplugs.
I agree 100%. Right. I mean, there's so many, we ride bikes with helmets, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And yes, very much so. So when you approach, musicians, can you tell me a little bit about what type of common things you see with musicians? In other words, what type of things in your practice that brings to you?
Yeah. So different types of things I see are sort of I would say my typical patients tend to be pro music industry, meaning they're often people who either tour with bands. They're either the artists themselves or the crew or management. And then I also work with orchestral musicians and local musicians. And, quite often I'll get calls about in-ear monitors, using them safely, wondering why suddenly someone has tinnitus, and then finding out they've been wearing one in-ear monitor for the past 5 years, or maybe not getting good isolation. Many people have been to see an audiologist and maybe had custom hearing protection made, but didn't have a hearing test done, didn't have the care portion. So maybe they'll contact me for that. And beyond that, I mean,
sorry, can you explain the in-ear monitor concept?
Sure. So
I know that. That's
in-ear monitors are, it's a large topic, but for anyone who doesn't know what an in-ear monitor is, it's a earpiece or earpieces that musicians wear to replace the little speaker that's in front of them on stage, or even up to, 200 speakers in front of them on stage, where they typically hear the mix that they need of the sound. So the musicians do not hear what the audience is hearing. So the audience is hearing what one engineer is mixing for them. He's called the front of house engineer. The musicians listen through earpieces that are mixed by someone called the monitor engineer. And so they're getting the exact mix of what they need. Maybe they only want one or two instruments and vocals, or maybe they want the whole band. So that's what an in-ear monitor is. And unfortunately, in-ear monitors have been marketed both by manufacturers and by audiologists as protective devices when they are not at all. And so there's been a lot of confusion, misinformation, and a lot of issues in the music industry. A lot of music-induced hearing disorders are caused by improper fit and use of in-ear monitors.
So the in-ear monitors are not clipped. In other words, they can present a sound that is within the damaging range.
Oh, absolutely. I just finished data collection with a colleague of mine, Dr. Alex Mibus at the University of Akron. And we were looking at isolation and attenuation of in-ear monitors, as well as output levels. And we found that they do exceed 143 dBA for output. Doesn't mean people are playing them at 143, but there is this
actually has that potential is very concerning. Right?
Correct. Now, sometimes, so many people use their in-ear monitors with wireless systems, meaning they have a little belt pack that they wear, and it's a receiver, and they receive their signal from a transmitter. That's often how you'll see pro touring bands using them. Sometimes those packs might have a limiter function. There is one in-ear monitor company I know of that has a limiter, but for the most part, it's not something that's used or considered. So when I've taken sound levels off of in-ear monitors on stages, I've seen upwards of 117 dBA.
That's impressive. So, I mean, what I'm taking from you as you're describing what you're doing in your practice, it's not just let me check the musician's ears. It's let me check the musician's ears and the whole, let's say, equipment milieu that they're operating. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And so much of the appointments that I have, so for any audiologist listening, wondering, well, what's the flow of the appointment? I'll spend probably 40 minutes on education, on figuring out what their setup is, what they need, what they're doing, and then just educating the heck out of them because it's probably the only chance they're going to get to hear it.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. And so I assume that you're consulting in many, many different venues. Is that right?
Yes. It's a lot. So in terms of seeing appointments, sometimes I do see people in my clinic where I'm at now, where one person or two people will come in together. Sometimes the whole band will come in. There's a big festival here in town this weekend, and I have some people coming from that festival on Monday since they're going to be nearby, some of the bands. Or I'll go backstage, see a band that way. Another way that I work is seeing a full orchestra at a time within a week. So I want to bring this up because you mentioned consulting. And for other audiologists who are out there maybe trying to get into this or seeing how they can do it, one of the things that I tend to include when I was doing this more often pre-COVID, because it was easier to, do things at that time, was including an educational session for management. And I try to do that now too. I do quite a bit of telehealth now. I'm head of audiology for Tuned, which is a new telehealth teleaudiology company. And I am able to see bands now through that and work and with their management. It's so important for everyone to have education. So for an audiologist out there thinking, well, I'm going to start working with groups, I'm going to start working with orchestras, make sure you're reaching everyone. Don't just say, well, this person's a tuba player or this person sits in front of trombones, so they probably need to have earplugs. I'm going to go fit everybody with earplugs. It's way more than that. The consultation part I really want to drive home here is really about the education of prevention of disorders of hearing, and everyone needs to be aware of that. Yeah.
Makes total complete sense. So the other thing that we were talking about in the warm up was concierge model, or that you refer to that. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, it's a great concept. Tell me what that means to you.
Yeah, it means two different things. I kind of think of two different buckets it could go into. One way that I do concierge is by going on site, and I think now that's mostly called, it's like a house call. And I think it's mostly now called mobile audiology. But when I started doing this a decade ago, it wasn't. It was kind of, oh, that's not OSHA regulation. Oh, what, you're going out to see musicians and you're doing more than just taking your impressions. Like, what is this? Which is not new. There are people like I mentioned, Mike Santucci, also Lisa Tannenbaum out in California, music audiologists who have been doing this since the 80s, but they did not have the equipment capability that I have now. So I do see that as one version of concierge. I also have just a handful. This is only something that I will offer someone if I think they need it, where they might pay me a retainer fee. And then they can, have more contact with me, and things like that if they think they need it. But that's another way to do concierge. And I do know other providers doing that now where they have an annual fee, and then people can have so many appointments or have their cell phone number, or what have you.
Right. No, I totally get it. So it's really high touch, high contact, high education, audiologic services for you. Concentrate predominantly on musicians. Is that correct?
Yes, I have. Now I've mentioned COVID a couple of times because that was a real pivotal point for me. In my clinic, when the music industry shut down, I shut down. Right. And so that was a hard time for all of us because my clinic was only music industry. In a way, it was a weird blessing because I had the opportunity to expand my thought processes. I had the ability to expand my services. So I work a lot now in what I'm calling modern hearing conservation, which is working with the workforce, people who are working from home, wearing headsets. A lot of the information I know from music industry applies to these people. I mentioned Tuned, being head of audiology for Tuned. The patients I see there are in their 30s, 40s. They're struggling with listening fatigue. They're starting to get tinnitus at the end of the day. Come to find out they're wearing headsets 8 to 10 hours a day on calls and meetings. and they don't know where to go. And they're not sure how to take care of it because the audiologist's office down the street, they might see as the place where someone goes to buy hearing aids. Right. Or maybe they've been to see an audiologist and they were told, hey, your hearing's normal. Your hearing's better than mine. I heard that the other day. Congratulations.
Which could be, actually, your hearing's just less bad than mine.
Well, it could be. But the other thing is hearing conservation principles are what this generation needs. Right. And it's, I think a lot of audiologists who I can think of a handful, they know how to do this, but then it's awkward. They're not used to it.
Right.
They're not used to someone coming in with normal hearing and saying, I wear this type of headset 8 hours a day. What can I do to help myself? Maybe they're not familiar with modern devices or hearing conservation principles. So I've kind of expanded a bit into that area, as well as I've taken a deeper dive into tinnitus management. So I do work with individuals now who have tinnitus.
And so would the answer be so right now, you and I are in a Zoom call, right? Or conference. I'm not wearing a headset. I don't believe you are either. So I'm just using.
Oh, I'm wearing in-ears.
Oh, okay. So I'm just using ambient speaker, right? And that seems to be almost the first answer would be for people. Am I wrong? If they're having, Zoom fatigue from a hearing point of view, would it be moving from the headset to a speaker? Would that make sense, or what would you suggest?
It might make sense. In my experience, many of them cannot. So they might be working from home. They might be in a shared workspace. I have used this in
other occupants in the home can't.
Yeah, it just depends on their setup. I recently had an interview where I spoke about a patient I saw who was 30, working in transcription, and had a pair of headphones that were provided by the company, working 10-hour days. And for the better part of her day, her volume was at 100%. And by the end of the day, she was exhausted and did not want to listen to anything. And so, it was looking at, are there better headphone options? Can we use something like Sonic Cloud, which is a download where she can learn to EQ? She had normal hearing. And so it's, this is where the audiologist steps in and says, hey, I know a lot about sound. How do we get you better clarity? Why are you turning up your sound? She was having a hard time understanding what she was trying to transcribe.
Is it poor quality?
That was partially it. So we worked with her company to get her a better setup audio wise. And then also we ended up using Sonic Cloud so that she had control because she's dealing with different types of recordings.
So tell me about Sonic Cloud. What?
Sonic Cloud is a company that they do online hearing screenings, but also the software. You can download it to your laptop or phone, I think, and it allows you to EQ the sound. So it actually shows you like a bar where you can adjust sound. So for someone like her, it was just a perfect setup because she has different types of recordings from different sources. And you can say, okay, great, these headphones have a wonderful frequency response for you. Well, if she's getting a recording that she still needs to adjust, she needs a tool.
She could get boost in the areas where.
Yeah. And most people like her, she needs the help of an audiologist to learn how to do that.
Sure.
To have some guidance, to have an annual hearing screening too. So I think there are millions of people who are going to be seeking out audiologic care from that generation. And I think audiologists will probably start seeing more hearing conservation coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, that's great and a great example. And I think, it's kind of interesting. You just look at you and I mean, I have a boom mic, you have a boom mic. We have acoustically treated rooms. I mean, 3 years ago, neither of us would have had these set up. So it's moved so fast that people who are in the industry might have the tools and the thing they need, but other people are like, well, what difference does it make?
Right.
It is what it is and it's fine. Right.
Right. I mean, even think about a corporate setting where they maybe have 8 people on a Zoom call and an audiologist being a consultant for that company saying, let's look at everyone's audio setup to make it easier for everyone to be understood. Let's look at how to set up captioning, things like that, where audiologists can really step in there and become the experts there as well.
No, I agree. Because I think the value proposition for the company is if you have people in the meeting, you actually want them to be engaged and contributory and get something out of it, not just, in front of the screen present. And so, they're investing a lot. I mean, if you have 8 people working, you can just do the math. They're investing a lot in that.
Yeah.
And so they want the most out of that hour.
Absolutely. I had someone ask me recently, it wasn't, I think she said there were 10 people on the call, but she was having difficulty hearing on these meetings. And she wanted to speak with an audiologist. The question from her was, how do I stand up for myself properly? What's the language I can, what is the proper advocacy here? And again, who better than an audiologist to step in and help with
I agree 100%. I mean, one of the things I always, I have patients who ask me. And so, one of the ways I always catch it is, well, it depends on your relationship with your boss, right? Because if you have a working relationship where they're advocating for you, it should be easy. Usually that conversation that person had probably already struggled, senses some tension that it's going to need to be, and, approached in a more delicate fashion. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's great. That's great input. Yes, I agree with you.
Cool.
So this is good stuff. And so, I was just thinking about it. Like, do you have any like crazy music stories, like stuff that's just, like what's the craziest thing that happened in terms of from an audiologic point of view? I don't need to know what happened. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, of course I have a lot of crazy stories, but I'm thinking of like the weirdest. There was a patient I saw who's the lead singer of a very famous rock band. And it was one of the first bands I saw when I struck out on my own. I had my boothless testing equipment. I was ready to, go do my thing. And it just ended up being the most complicated hearing loss that maybe I've ever seen, with a person, a very eccentric person. And, I was on his turf and trying to speak to him, like an audiologist, and he was very distracted. And he had a complicated hearing loss due to a bar fight he had been in. And it was just a wild conversation. And it ended with discussing new in-ear monitor technology that he could use. And he asked if he could source silicone through me, this ear impression silicone. And I said, well, what do you need this for? Like, I just treat everyone the same. And I was like, why do you want this? And he wouldn't tell me. He said he couldn't tell me. And I said, no, you cannot. I'm not giving you any silicone because, who knows if he's going to be out doing something with it. So that was one of my craziest things. Was it was a very complicated mixed hearing loss. It was me as a young private practice owner trying to make a name for myself. And thank goodness it went okay. And he did end up going to see an ear, nose, and throat physician because I said, have you ever had this looked at?
Right.
Now here's the kicker. This is someone who's been on the road for, probably 15, 20 years. He's probably had, I'm going to venture to say, at least 6 different sets of in-ear monitors fit by audiologists. He had never had a hearing evaluation.
Well, I think one of the language issues if I can talk about it, I think one of the language issues is acquisition of objects or technology is the language we use.
Yes.
And go get hearing aids, go get in-ear monitors, but that's not actually what you're saying. What you're saying is go treat your hearing loss or go protect your hearing. And
yes,
when we use that language, people think all they're doing is getting the technology or the object and they're dissociating it from exactly what you're saying. I mean, and we allow that to happen to some extent too, right? Like, oh, well, they just want in-ear monitors. I don't need to check their hearing. It's like, no, actually, that's what you would want if somebody were doing this for you. So I agree with you 1,000%.
Yeah. And this is another area that I also think is changing. So for example, the American Academy of Audiology now has a clinical consensus document on working with the music industry. So I was one of the authors for that. I think that audiologists get a little shy because it's not the day-to-day fitting hearing aids. They might not know the correct protocol, even though every audiologist has all the tools, all the knowledge they need. It's just a matter of looking at sort of applying it differently, or actually really just having a step-by-step guide.
Sure.
Which is why we made that document. So everyone can feel a little more confident and secure, because I could go out and talk to any audiologist and no, they might not have the specialized understanding and information that I have, but that's okay. They can do a hearing test and talk about hearing conservation. And that's the bottom line.
So Heather, you did mention your boothless hearing test. Tell me, what does that comprise? Is that something special or is that just the terminology? What does that comprise?
So I use a KUDUwave, which was created by a company called Imoyo out of South Africa. and it's inserts that have cups that go over top to meet ANSI standards.
So it's acoustically isolating despite that.
Correct. Now, granted, on the software, I can see the sound levels, to see if I'm...
measure background noise and see if it's...
Yeah. So I can't be on stage during sound check, doing hearing tests, but backstage, I'm usually fine, or on the tour bus or in an office.
More acoustically favorable than that, but they'll let you do it outside of a booth, having to drag a booth. Yes.
And it's been great. I like working with the company because, like, for example, recently I was doing a research study. I was on at the University of Akron, was on a Department of Defense grant doing a pharmaceutical research study, and we were using KUDUwaves, and we got the words in noise test added to the software. And I've been using that on all these musician patients now. So on top of air and bone and speech, I'm able to do words in noise and get more data, which I find very exciting.
No, it's great. I was just curious about what that looks like. So this is really a fascinating subject. I mean, it's really cool stuff that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
So one of the questions I love asking everybody is Heather, what's your favorite sound? I mean, as you said in you're in the sound business, which I agree 1,000%. What is your favorite sound?
It changes a lot.
Okay.
And I think of several different favorite sounds, but one of my favorite sounds used to be, when people used to ask me that question, I would say it was the sound of a square dance and my friends dancing and playing music, because I'm a fiddle player. But actually, I've got to say, it's probably at this point, this is going to sound so cheesy, Mark, but it's probably my husband's voice.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Sweet.
It's probably my favorite sound.
That's a great sound. Why not?
I love being read to, and he reads to me. And that's one of my favorite things. So.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. So, the other thing is like, if you were to you're here at this place today in your profession, who are the people you thank to help you get here?
Oh my goodness. So there are some giants in music audiology. The number one person I would thank is Michael Santucci. And I call him my audiology dad. When he took me as a fourth year student, he really wasn't taking students at the time. And I met him at a conference and said,
please,
this is an area I want to specialize in. You're the only guy who has an up and running brick and mortar musicians clinic and all this stuff. And he agreed. And thank goodness we hit it off. But there are other people. I already mentioned Lisa Tannenbaum, people like Meade Killian, Marshall Chasin. And then there's other people in my generation of music audiologists who I talk to a lot. We bounce ideas off each other, and I really rely on them. And, people like Frank Wardinger and Corey Portnoff and Brian Fliger. And, there's these people who you just know you can talk to.
Yeah.
And I love the support we have, the community we have. And I love now that I see myself and others being that for other people.
Yeah.
So I get emails, all the time asking about becoming a music audiologist. And I have Zoom meetings with people who've been in practice for 20 years, but they want to start going out and seeing musicians. And I just love watching it spread. But it really came from guys like Meade Killian and Michael Santucci, Marshall Chasin, and Lisa Tannenbaum, kind of the upper echelon of who started it. And if it weren't for them, the path would not have been there for me.
Well, that's really wonderful. This has been a great conversation, Heather. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and I can just sense your passion about it, how much you love this. What is your favorite instrument to play? The fiddle?
I do love playing fiddle. There's another instrument I play called a nyckelharpa, which is like a Swedish fiddle, and I recently picked it back up. I hadn't played it for a number of years. It's really fun. And if there's someone listening who's like, what is that? Look it up, nyckelharpa. It's a fascinating instrument, but fiddle's probably my main passion. That's great.
Yeah. And so I assume you take care of singers as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Oh, that's great. So yeah, you're doing it. So everybody, this is Dr. Heather Malyuk. She's the founder of Soundcheck Audiology. She specializes in musicians and performers, and also has kind of a concierge hearing wellness practice. And, Heather, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is by email. My email address is heather@soundcheckaudiology.com.
That's great. So if anybody has any questions or anything they want to learn more of her, she's clearly a wonderful resource and passionate about it and does great work. From her description, it sounds wonderful. So anybody who needs help or any questions, give her a reach out. Heather, this has been really wonderful. I appreciate your time coming on this episode and sharing your experience and your passion. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been great. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the ListenUp Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.